if you're going to be a successful businessman, especially across business person, across multiple dimensions, multiple enterprises, you bloody well better be honest. Because it's going to catch up with you, man. And the probability that you're going to be a successful crook multiple times is very, very low. You can do that, but you have to move constantly. Right, so your reputation doesn't keep up with you. So there is some association between success and moral virtue, thank God. But it's a rough approximation, and there's plenty of exceptions. It's very hard for creative people to monetize their productivity, for example. So you have unrewarded virtue, and that's a flaw of the monetary system. It means we haven't been able to, and you might say the same thing applies to such things as our inability to pay homemakers. Now, why don't we pay homemakers? Well, it's because what they produce isn't monetizable for 20 years. And our economic system isn't sophisticated enough to figure out how to pay people for returns that are that, pushed off into the future. That doesn't make it right, but we don't know how to fix it technically, right? I mean, if you're a venture capitalist and you want to invest in something, you want a tenfold return on your investment within a handful of years. You can't afford to invest over a 20-year period, and so that makes it really rough on homemakers because we're not sophisticated enough to monetize it. So it's a measurement problem, but unless you can figure out a better way of doing it, you're stuck with what we've got. See, that negotiation is the eradication of the need for that pretense. It's like, you got a problem with me, let's sort it out. Because we're going to carry it with us. You want to do that? So people wonder why I engage in conflict. I hate conflict. And I find it very stressful. But conflict delayed is conflict multiplied.
Ooh, that's so true. It's worse to have lingering conflict for months, years, decades than the pain of direct conflict that can hopefully resolve and move on.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and as the conflict is delayed, it's the reasons multiply. And the persons who are involved, because they're avoiding, demean themselves and get weaker and less confident. And so it's a vicious circle. It's better to notice. There's a line in the New Testament, Christ talks about prayer. And so you imagine that as communion with God. So you could imagine that as an attempt to confer with the ideal, or maybe to even occupy that space for a while. Well, Christ says, if you have a problem with your brother, fix that first. Go pray later. Yeah. Well, that's wise. And that's a good thing, if you're angry with the people who are close to you, if you're resentful. I read a lot about that in chapter 11. Resentment is so useful. It's so useful. It's so horrible. It's so toxic. It's so destructive, but it's so informative. If you're resentful, you're either being oppressed and not standing up for yourself, or you're whiny and should grow up. And both of those things are really useful to realize. And all you have to do is notice that you're resentful and want to do something about it. Okay, I'm resentful. Okay, am I immature? Are people picking on me, or I am immature? If people are picking on me, do I have something to say or something to do? I should do it. It's a gateway to improvement, resentment. Or you can let it... You can foster it and let it devour you and take you places that no one with a clear mind would ever want to go. Hell. That's resentment, man. That's the pathway to hell. And if you don't believe in hell, you don't have any imagination. That's my sense of things.
How do we start to heal the memories of the past, the traumas of the past, so that they don't keep hurting us in the present?
Well, the first thing I would say is, sometimes there's a crisis and well-meaning mental health professionals rush in to discuss the trauma while it's still happening. That's a really bad idea. People are generally traumatized because something actually horrible happened. And dwelling on it in the moment just makes it worse. It's not like anybody has a solution. Here's how you should understand this. Someone's just shot up your kid's school. Here's how you should understand this. That'll make it all better. It's like, no, it won't. If you have old baggage, that often comes up if you're having an argument with someone, doesn't it? You know how it is. This is partly why people don't like to have a dispute within a relationship, because it's a thread and you pull on that thread and just God. Well, we had another rule. Do not agree with something you don't agree with.
Ooh.
Like if we decide, you and me, that we're doing this, we don't go back and say, well, I didn't really mean it. We don't get to play revisionist with our history. So if you don't agree, don't agree. Fight, object, or hold your peace. Because you see what happens with couples is there's a little fight, and then one says to the other, yeah, but you did this. And then that person says, yeah, I know I did that, but then that was because you did this, and each this gets bigger until what's on the table is, why the hell should we stay together at all?
Right.
And so every fight becomes, why the hell should we stay together at all? So that's another thing you want to do, is you want to have the fight about this thing.
Not about everything.
About the past, not everything. It's like, okay, you were flirting. I think you were flirting more than you should have been. Okay, so I go away and I think, well, okay, maybe I was. Okay, well, then we have to have a discussion about why. And maybe we can solve that. But mostly what we have to do is figure out how to not have that happen again. Okay, so we're going to go see the same couple again. What is it that you want me to do? So I'm the flirtatious one, let's say. What do you want me to do? Well, you have to figure that out. It's like, no, I'm stupid. Like you. We're equally stupid. I need to know what would satisfy you. And you need to figure out what would satisfy you so I know. And that's also extremely useful, is establish your conditions of satisfaction, make them explicit, let the other person know.
Yeah, you can't read someone's mind.
We're very bad at that. We're bad at reading our own minds, for that matter. So, if I have a fight with Tammy, let's say, sometimes I remember to say, okay, what do you want me to do right now? What can I do? What should I say and mean? And you think, well, you shouldn't let the other person put words in your mouth. Well, fair enough. I'm not asking for something false. I'm saying, I'd like to not have this happen. Can you see a way out? Is there something I could do to increase the probability that that's the route we could take? And, sometimes that works. But the other person has to let you know what they would find satisfying. What your brain wants from you in relationship to a traumatic memory is indication that you're no longer vulnerable to the same problem. That's what memory is for, right? You remember something bad and you process it so that you change your interpretation or your behavior or the situation or whatever you can change so that it isn't going to happen in the future. And if you do that thoroughly, you'll generally let yourself rest.
You have the memory to protect yourself from it happening again.
Well, that's the purpose of memory in general. You make sense of your past behavior so that the good things that happen to you can be duplicated and the bad things can be avoided. It's not to make an objective record of the world. It's to make a functional map of the world that you can apply to the future. One of the things I tend to do is to look at symbolic representations through the lens of evolutionary biology, rather than assuming that these representations are mere superstitions or play no functions. Like we have the idea that there's a deity that's father-like. So it's a disembodied spirit in some sense, that's eternal, that has paternal characteristics. It's like, okay, well, strip it of its metaphysics. Only I'm not saying that fundamentally you have to strip it of its metaphysics. I'm not making that claim. I'm saying if you strip it of its metaphysics and just look at it as a biological phenomena, it's like, well, what might the idea that there's an eternal paternal spirit, what might that be a reflection of? Well, it's like, well, there's you imitating your father, but your father imitated his father, and his father imitated his father. And so, in some sense, what your father actually imitated was the pattern of fathers across time. And you could think of the transcendent father as the pattern of fathers across time. That's the right way to think about it. And it's even developmentally and neurobiologically correct, because when a child imitates his father in pretend play, you think, well, when you're pretending, you're imitating. We're pretending to be your father. We're playing house, for example. You're imitating your father. It's like, no. If I'm imitating you, I do this, right? So I'm mimicking what you're doing with my body. But when I'm pretending to be my father, I'm doing something way more sophisticated than that. I'm observing my father across multiple situations. And then I'm abstracting out the commonalities in behavior and attitude across those situations that make him father. And then I incorporate that and dramatize it in my pretend play. It's unbelievably sophisticated. And so it's what the child is doing in pretend play is coming to embody the disembodied spirit of the father. So that's the disembodied spirit. But that disembodied spirit is a reflection insofar as the child is making contact with the father and not just the idiosyncratic personality of his particular father. He's abstracting out the generality across all those situations. And that generality is in turn a reflection of the imitation of the father going all the way back in time. And so you think, well, that is a disembodied spirit. It's a disembodied spirit that's incarnated in the collective of fathers across time. And what is that? Well, it's a judge, that's for sure. It's a judge. Even when you interact with the hierarchy of men who are currently alive, something can be abstracted out of that that's like the patriarchal spirit. And if you don't think that's judging you, you are not thinking. It's absolutely judging you.